Good day, friends. Good to have you here tonight for the podcast Wounded Hearts, Wounded Churches. This live platform offers counseling sessions, meaningful question and answers, and a counseling continuum through our counseling line. Our co-hosts include Miss Lolita, she's the personnel director, Mrs. Tanil, our technical director. And we have a list of contributors and supporters, Raymond Edwards, business owner, Pastor Larry Brown, and many others who are involved in our program here. Our main focus, friends, is to reach out to those who've been wounded, who've been hurt, to give them hope that you can make it and you can do it. So we want to thank our viewers for taking part. This 26 minutes goes by pretty quickly, so get your questions in, and we would love to address those for you. We mentioned our new clip we have. It's an introductory clip about the program. You can forward that to other people if you wish. But we're well over 500 viewers on that. Thank you for that. Last week, over 100 viewers listening, last count, so we're glad about that. And we've been able to expand via our Director of Technical Activities. And we're in, of course, Amazon Music, Pandora in Review, iHeart Sitter, and others, of course, Facebook and YouTube. So we're glad about that. And of course, if you wish to contact our office, Wounded Hearts, you can do that by calling 487-283-9093 or our call-in number. Even tonight, you can use that. That number is 1-866-538-3664. Another line we have for counseling, that number is 478-784-7600. And again, many times we get questions in it the last 3 or 4 minutes, but if you have a question, now's the time. You can go to YouTube and type in Church of God in Macon, Georgia. You'll see there the live banner that you can connect with the broadcast there. Well, I want to introduce our guest tonight. She was here last week, and again, well over 100 viewers. If you have questions for Deb, now's the time to get them in. Deb Wunderly. She visited, of course, with us last year, had an exciting time. And friends, she's a life coach. That is a profession, and there's been studies on it. And they are able to help people to live a better life, dealing with issues and problems. And that is what she does as a professional. And so we want to talk about that part of being a life coach and what she does. And they offer help, again, in many areas, maybe irritability, persistent issues, high stress, sexual addiction, all of that they're able to work with and help you to those issues. In fact, I read a clip by Kathy Wong, who was very appreciative of those people doing that work. So we have Deb Wunderly here tonight as a life coach. We want to begin our questions. And again, if you have comments, now's the time. This is an exciting subject we want to work with. She's a counselor in this field, and it's so wonderful to have her here. Deb, hello tonight. Good to see you.
Hello. Thanks for having me again.
Deb, tell us about life coaches, what they do, and how you're able to help people in certain areas, and how we can contact you if wants to hire you as a life coach. What are the steps to do that?
Sure. Thank you. Well, really briefly, life coach is a little bit, excuse me, like a therapist, except I'm a peer mentor. So I get to share a little bit more about my story, and I'm able to walk alongside a person in a little bit of a different way than a therapist. I don't diagnose or prescribe anything. I reflect things back, ask questions, offer some psychoeducation or guidance, and just kind of am a hand to hold on the recovery journey. I'm with Hope House, and I don't have that number handy, or it's at the beginning of this video, though. You can look it up.
Sure, it is.
Or you can look it up, Hope House, hopehousehealing.com. You can find it on there. So, yeah.
I guess our first question, how is the principle of forgiveness addressed within the 12-step structure?
So I do have a lot of experience, about 10 years of experience with 12-step fellowships, and they all stem from Alcoholics Anonymous. And, I was surprised when I thought about this question. The principle of forgiveness is actually interwoven throughout all of the steps. It's even in step one, which is, and we admitted we were powerless over, you can just fill in the blank. There's many different fellowships that end in the letter A, so it can be anything. And for me, the word powerless can sound like helpless or hopeless, but it's not. It just means by myself, I don't have access to the power necessary to heal and transform myself. I need other people. And being able to see my addiction, whatever it is, as something I'm suffering from, like a cancer, it's a disease of the mind, body, and spirit. And if I'm, thinking of it in that way, powerless means autopilot. Addiction or compulsive behaviors are actually the flight part of fight flight. There's a threat response. So when we're in fight or flight, our thinking part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, is actually disconnected, and we're not reasoning adults. We're trying to keep ourselves safe. So addictive compulsive behaviors are part of that, autopilot, to try to keep ourselves safe, to avoid feeling uncomfortable emotions, and to deal with stressful situations. So step one, I can't solve that problem or do anything to change that with lasting change all by myself. The principle of forgiveness is woven in there, because having compassion for myself, that this is not a choice, this is a disease, and it's okay if I can't do that. I don't have to shame myself. I can allow some people who have been there and know how to apply the spiritual principles of the 12 steps. I can allow them to help me. And there's where forgiveness shows up. And in the second step, we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. The word is in English is sanity. In the Spanish version of the 12 steps, it's sano juicio, which means sane judgment, wise judgment. I like that better, to be honest.
Sure.
And believing that God can help my prefrontal cortex turn back on. That's basically what I'm saying. Outside of myself, I can't turn that back on by myself. So I need access to God's power, and I need to access that in a different way, because obviously what I've been trying to do isn't working for me. That's why I need help with the 12 steps, or with a coach, or with a therapist, or maybe all three, or other ways of reaching out beyond myself for help.
I've been teaching this 12 steps about 25 years. And when you mentioned step 8, I'll read it first. It says, made a list of persons who we harmed and become willing to make amends to them all. And that word amends brought me back to the Bible, where one fellow said, Lord, if I've done wrong, I'll pay back fourfold. So tell us about that, where forgiveness, it takes the mending or the making amends. What does that mean to you, making amends?
Thank you. So apologizing and asking for forgiveness, that's great. But in active addiction, many of us have done that a lot and not changed. So people kind of don't believe us when we say, I'm sorry, or next time will be different, or I'll stop doing this, because we're powerless, right? We can't, we can't do that by ourselves. So once we've worked and applied the principles of the other steps, we have more access to the enabling power of Christ. My higher power is God, Christ. And once I have access to that power, I've taken a look at what's blocking me from connecting with God, and I've asked for that to be removed. And then I'm ready to take a look at harm that I've caused. And once I've determined how my actions have impacted another person, then I'm ready to own what I've done and talk with them, or maybe write a letter, or, if it's not possible to make a direct amend, there's a way to make an indirect amend, to right the wrong, repair, restore, amend, fix. So like if I stole something, I can return it, or if something was broken, it can be repaired or replaced, or if something is lost, maybe I can look for it and help find it. So the principle of restitution is a really important part of the repentance process. Because if we don't recognize what harm we've done and feel remorse for it, and then try to to make things right, it's just empty apologizing, and that's actually not that's not part of the recovery process.
Now, Deb, let me step in here for a moment. What about those things that you've broken emotionally? You've mentioned stealing, those are physical things. You can return the item, you can, fix certain things. But what about those wounds that you can't fix? How do we mend that?
Good question. Good question.
A good question, and that points to some really important things to recognize, like stealing somebody's virginity, for example, because I'm really familiar with recovery from sex addiction. That can't be fixed in the way that we have the ability to fix. So for those, sometimes trust in a relationship is another example. Sometimes that can be rebuilt and sometimes it can't. So there's some certain things we can't make direct amends for. But as we continue our recovery process, we do want to put back positive energy into the world and try to set right some of the harm that we've caused in a certain way. So we can make indirect amends, like maybe donating to a cause that helps um, victims of domestic violence, or other type of, maybe helping somebody that reminds us of somebody that we have harmed. If direct contact or direct amends will injure ourselves or others, and it's not a great idea. Like, I wouldn't want to tell somebody that I had an affair with their partner. That's just going to cause more problems, or tell the partner, whatever. I wouldn't want to insert myself into a situation where it would cause more issues. So I need to find a way to set right as best I can, clean up my side of the street. Because the amend is not for the other person. The amend is to clean up my side of the street, so that I'm not carrying that. But ultimately, it's God that removes that culpability, that guilt. He's the one that can proclaim me clean. And it's through the power of the sacrifice of Christ, I believe, that makes that possible for me to be cleansed of stuff like that. And it also heals the person that I have harmed too, if they let him.
And I'm guessing that when I have the attitude of trying to amend, that should change me. That will affect my constitution, my ability. All that will affect that, my whole way of life. When I'm trying to amend as best I can, people will see that. Will people see that and observe that in me?
Yes, absolutely. And I also remember that the results are not in my control. I've got to do what I can and do my part as guided by my God and others that are kind of, I wouldn't recommend doing this process on one's own, because our own thinking sometimes is not, it can be clouded. We can have a motivation that isn't exactly ready for something like this. So working together with other people and really carefully planning how this amend process will happen, definitely it can cause people to change. It can cause me to change. It can cause my whole household started recovery when I started recovery. But again, the results are in God's hands and in God's timing. So if my goal is to try to make something happen, if I'm trying to make somebody forgive me or hear those words from somebody, my motivation isn't right for this process.
And
my
Deb,
goal is just to do my part and to let God do his.
In my background in counseling, it's been about 800,000 hours professionally counseling. And the vast majority of issues that arose, it was both individuals who had a part in the process. Maybe one a little bit major and minor, but they both had a part to play in the disaster, so to speak. Have you found that in your counseling and in your behaviors and activities?
Yes. And I work with those whose lives have been affected by compulsive sexual behavior, as well as those whose sexual behavior is impacting theirs and other people's lives. And for those that see themselves as a victim, it may be hard to look at their part, what they contributed, because they say, I did nothing. I was just minding my own business, and then this happened, but I'm not claiming that a person, like, for example, that was molested,
Right. Yeah,
that's a different thing.
Right.
But for me, I also was molested when I was a child, and I don't claim that as my fault. But my part was, as an adult, continuing to fear and hate men, continuing to
right.
hold resentment towards the things that happened in my life because of that. Some things were set in motion and some patterns developed that caused a lot of pain and suffering for myself and other people. And holding on to that and continuing those patterns, I do have to own responsibility. Once I got a chance to look at clearly what was happening, then I have a choice, then I'm no longer a victim.
Right.
Once I know
Right.
this information, then I can reach out to others for tools and ideas of how to stop those patterns of behavior. And I can reach out to God for healing and for expanding and deepening my love for myself and others and connection with God. And that can change how I continue my patterns of belief and patterns of behavior. That can just impact everything, every way that I see myself and interact with the world.
Any questions for our director?
Not at the moment, no, sir.
So, Deb, what you're saying is real forgiveness can free you, give you boldness, help you to enjoy life. Is that true?
Yes, absolutely. And sometimes forgiveness is not something that I have the ability to do. Sometimes forgiveness is something that is a gift from God, something that happens to me. My part is to become willing. And if I may, I might just share a little part of a story.
Please, if you would, please.
There's a woman named Corrie ten Boom who was a
Yes.
World War II Holocaust
Right. Yes.
survivor. And
Right.
she and her father and her sister were in a concentration camp, and her father and her sister, she watched them die. And there's some horrible things that happened. But once she was freed, she started to go around and talk, give presentations about forgiveness. And after one such talk, she found herself face to face with one of her former guards.
Right.
And he said he had become a Christian, and he extended his hand for a handshake and asked her for her forgiveness.
Wow.
And she froze. I mean, I can put myself in that moment of,
Wow. Yeah.
how difficult would that be? And, in her words, she said, forgiveness is not an act of the will. It is an act of the will. I'm sorry. It's an act of the will, not an emotion. She knew that shaking hands with one of the most vicious guards at Ravensbrück, who had mocked women as they showered, that was one of the most difficult things she'd ever been asked to do. But she also knew God wanted her to do that. And so she prayed. She said, Jesus, help me. I can lift my hand. I can do that much. You supply the feeling. And when that happened, she thrust out her hand, and in her words, she said, as I did, an incredible thing took place. A current started in my shoulder and raced down my arm, sprang into our joined hands, and then this healing warmth seemed to flood my whole being, bringing tears to my eyes. I forgive you, brother, I cried, with all my heart. I relate to that because I sometimes don't have it in me to be able to forgive something that's been really, really terrible. But forgiveness isn't mine. It's a gift from God. So if I become willing to let forgiveness flow through me, then that healing can help both of us.
My. Questions from the director?
Yes, sir. Mrs. The 313 asks, do you have to forgive the person that hurt you?
Good question.
Good question. For me, there's no have tos. If I want to continue blocking myself from connecting more fully with God or connecting with other people, I can. It's a choice, But for me, forgiveness, again, is not about the other person. It's for me. And forgiveness doesn't mean that I make everything okay, what was done to me. Sometimes legal action needs to happen. There needs to be accountability, for certain things. But what forgiveness is for me is letting go of what I'm holding against them. I'm kind of taking them off the hook, so to speak. I'm letting them down off of what I am holding against them. And I'm not keeping that anymore. That doesn't mean I have to be in contact with the person or be best friends with them. That it doesn't have to mean anything else except for I'm just freeing myself from that burden that I'm carrying, or asking God to help me free. Because sometimes, like I said, I need help in being freed from that.
Friends, this is Wounded Hearts, Wounded Churches. If you've been wounded, leaving the church, in the church, whatever, we want to be a source of love for you. that you can be reconnected. God can heal those wounds. This is Deb Wunderly tonight to talk to us about these issues. So stay tuned. We want to do what we can to be a support system. Deb, so my question to you is, healing and forgiveness, are those connected? Can I have one without the other?
That's a really good question. I think for me, forgiveness has been incremental. As I mentioned, the first step, admitting that I have a problem and accepting help, meant that I was forgiving myself, forgiving myself, freeing myself from the shame of, if only I were strong enough or, whatever enough, then I could handle this, forgiving myself for having a disease that I did not cause. So that's one increment of healing. And then as I go through the other steps, coming to believe that a power outside of or greater than myself, who I call God, can restore me to spiritual health or wise judgment, and then making a decision to turn my will, my life over to God's care.
Step 3, yeah.
It is step 3.
Yeah.
And that
My
again
favorite.
is incremental healing,
That's my
right?
favorite step.
It's letting go of control. I have a lot of different controlling behaviors, because there's a lot of fear there that my needs won't get met if I don't fix, manage, and control everybody, and allowing myself to ask for God's help in transforming some of those character strengths, which have been twisted into what people call defects. I call them default patterns of behavior and belief. Like, for example, being bossy and controlling, that's one of my favorite defects. And it's not something that I want, to rule my life, but doing an inventory, which is step 4, taking a look at, oh yeah, there's many situations. I can give examples of times that I've tried to take control and manipulate and make things happen, and that doesn't serve me, and that doesn't help the situations. So, step 5 is to share what I'm discovering in my inventory with, admit it to myself and to God and to another person. Step 6 is to become willing to have that changed. And step 7 is to humbly ask God to have that removed.
Person to fix some characters.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we have, friends, if you got questions, now that we got about 6 minutes. If you have questions, please call in or chime in. Let's talk about this trauma. We might think we see trauma maybe in a car accident, being a paraplegic, maybe a divorce, but there are other traumas in life that we come in contact with quite regularly. Am I right?
Yes. And, I was listening to a podcast from Bessel van der Kolk, the writer of The Body Keeps the Score and one of the leaders in the world of trauma recovery and just information about trauma. And he said something really interesting. He said, it's not the event, it's the residue. It's what happens, the after effects that happen.
The after effects can many times be worse than the trauma itself.
Absolutely. Yes. So it can be anxiety, it can be depression, it can be physiological. A lot of inflammation in the body can be traced back to trauma. It can be, all kinds of symptoms and issues and challenges. So healing the trauma for a lot of us, it's stuck in our brain. The thing that happened and the impact is stuck in a part of our brain that thinks it's still happening, even though, as a rational adult, I know that I'm safe and I have choices. But when that button gets pushed or when something happens that triggers those emotions, I go back into that fight or flight that I was talking about, where I'm no longer thinking like an adult and the symptoms of the trauma show up. For me, sometimes I lose the ability to speak, which shows me that something has been tripped that's pre-verbal, very early childhood. And so when I recognize that I'm going into that space, I have just a little bit of time where I can do something to get back in my body, to get my body back online, to remember that I'm in the present and that I have the ability to communicate and I have power and choices that I did not have at that time. Even if I can't remember what it was, my body is still back in that reaction. And so I need to have help sometimes in learning how to deal with that when that happens and catch it so that I can get myself back regulated and back in the present.
And so, Deb, I'm guessing, let's say if my pastor backslid and left the church. That would cause trauma. A person backsliding would cause trauma.
Mm-hmm.
A church split would cause trauma. So all these things can cause actual trauma to the mind and heart. Am I right or wrong?
Absolutely. If I trust somebody and I look up to them and then they fall from that pedestal, that can shake my whole paradigm, and it could cause me to lose faith, and it could cause me to ask a lot of questions and just wonder where I am in the world, cause me to lose my footing with spirituality. Yeah, it could have a lot of impact.
I would call that trauma.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Statistics indicate 2 years ago, 38% of ministers, women and men, had inappropriate contact with someone in the church. 38%. Before COVID, between 80 and 100 ministers would sit down every Sunday giving up their posts. Pre-COVID, statistics say quite clearly about 8,000 churches close up every year. And I'm sure that causes trauma. So, Deb, what can a person do if they've been traumatized?
Well, we can't heal from it by ourselves. One of the number one needs for somebody who has had an experience that has caused a negative impact is to be seen and heard. So we need to have safe people
Amen.
that we can share our story with
Amen.
and get it out and have it be witnessed. And sometimes that's all it's needed, but
Right.
sometimes there's more that's needed.
Right.
We might need to work with the symptoms that are coming up. Some people might need medication. Some people might need trauma therapy. Some people might just need like exercises to stimulate the vagus nerve to calm themselves down and get back into their bodies and get back grounded and centered. There's a lot of different things that are available now. There's a lot more understanding and a lot more tools that are available than there used to be.
And the first thing you mentioned is we got to talk about it, don't we? We have to discuss it. It's got to be talked about, discussed first, right?
And with safe people, because sometimes if we tell somebody that isn't understanding or capable of holding space for something big, it can re-traumatize us or add to the trauma.
And that's common. Friends, our time is gone again. We're going to have Deb back, talk about her program that she's involved with, Wounded Hearts, Wounded Churches, Thursday at 7. We're reaching out to you. This is Church of God for Church of God people. Those who've been wounded and hurt, there is hope. We come to you through different areas we want to push and promote, and that's forgiveness, healing, reconciliation. These things work together to give us a more meaningful life in serving God. Deb, a wonderful job, as always. To our staff, thank you so much. To our viewers, glad you tuned in tonight. May the Lord bless you.
Thank you.